Okay, we're going to go ahead and start. This is the public budget meeting and hearing on March 18th, 2021. It is being broadcast, and we will be joined by the town manager. We're just finalizing getting some people on with us. Hi, Eric. You're back.
Hello. I'm back.
I just opened the meeting, and it is a public hearing, and hopefully we will have some questions and comments. We do know that dealing with public hearings with Zoom is somewhat less participatory, and that's very regretful due to COVID-19, but we'll do our very best in tonight's meeting to at least get all of the information out. It will be recorded, as you know, and will be available on YouTube, on the town's YouTube channel, and we'll make sure to promote that so people can see it. Tonight there's going to be a welcome and introductions, a review of the budget and meeting goals. Eric will do the lion's share of presenting, and I want to start by going ahead and welcoming everyone and introducing the members of the select board. So with us is Chris Sammons. Hi, Chris.
Hello.
Great. Yeah, we'll have to go back to that view for a minute. Ralph Eno is with us. He's at the town office.
Greetings all.
Okay, Catherine Woodson is with us.
Hello.
And Dennis Price, the vice chair, is with us.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for being here.
And just introducing myself, I'm Bruce Burgoyne. So I'll ask Andy to go ahead and introduce members of the budget committee. And before he does, I'll just simply start off with a very quick thank you to all of you for all of the work that you do. You make our decision and overview and diligence so much better as a town. And after that, Andy, if you'll just go into the public meeting goals and ongoing budget goals, I'd appreciate it.
I can do that. Well, thank you all for being here. And the budget committee thanks the town office staff and the members of a lot of volunteer boards who have made it possible for us to pull this budget together. I mean, we can't do it without them. But we try to do as well as we can with them. I'm here, I'm the chair for some reason, Andy Tallman. Ellen Schneider is our secretary, and there she is, thank you. Hi, Ellen.
Hi.
Marty Hanisch, and who has adjusted his monitor, is here. Rebecca Lambert and Ed Sims. So we have a full complement here. The goal tonight is to present the draft of the budget, to hear what questions people may have, including obviously all of us elected and appointed folks, but anybody from the regular citizenry as well, and then provide some information about the upcoming town meeting and secret ballot vote. One of our ongoing goals, which has been challenged by COVID, is we're trying to continue to improve communication with the public and get their feedback on the budget. We're doing what we can. Technically, we're all in open meetings. People can tune in and hear us, but we don't seem to be a very exciting show. So we're doing the best we can. We have also decided and continue to work on the things that we have control over, that we consider the town budget as an entity, even though our taxes also support the school and the county. We try to stay informed on what they're doing, but we try not to sway too hard what we're trying to accomplish based on what they're having to do. We are also working and have worked for a while on thinking about our capital investment cycle and making sure that we smooth out those things as best we can so that we don't have big lumps and hollows from year to year. We also try to use designated funds and the undesignated funds in a responsible way that will keep both our constituents and our auditors happy. And the goal of this whole thing, since we are, a public entity, is to do all this to best serve the public good. We're trying to consider that, particularly this year, the impacts of COVID-19 on our revenues and expenditures and municipal operations. We're trying to use debt wisely and responsibly when it makes sense to do that. We're prioritizing investment in recreational assets and public facilities this year, particularly outdoor recreation assets, given that the increased interest, demand, and use in that in our current situation. We also want to provide reliable public services and do this all to minimize the impact to our taxpayers. So we've had a dozen public meetings and presentations. We've been working on this since October. We've had some members of the public, a bunch of boards and committees. The Budget Committee and the Select Board have all worked and massaged this budget. We've reviewed all the details for all the departments and divisions, and we've reviewed and revised the 5-year capital plan. So we've been doing some work this winter. So I think this from here on in, it looks like it belongs to Eric. We're going to talk about, I could read these, but they're really his stuff.
All right, thanks, Sandy. I'll be happy to go through that. I'll start with the screen sharing now, and we'll go from
Eric?
there. Yes.
Eric, if we could pause one moment. I was talking with my on mute. Sorry about that. Thank you very much, Andy, and again to the Budget Committee. I think how we'll work this tonight is we'll just take questions as we go along, mostly for clarification. I will ask Eric to pause a couple times in case you want to specifically, for example, at the end of revenue, talk about revenues generally, or at where I would call logical breaks, to make sure that if there are members of the public participating, that they can do that. And also, if you have a meeting you want a question you want to hold until that point, that's fine. But particularly if something's being explained and it's not there's not enough clarity around it, please just go ahead and ask. I think we're at the people count that can be done. So Eric, if you'll start with revenue highlights and walk us right in through the budget, and I'll try to interrupt minimally and shut off my loud fan.
All right, thanks, Bruce. Appreciate the direction on that. So here we go with the screen share. And we will see if it works better than the last time I tried to do this. There we go. All right. And down here, get this out of the way. All right. Is that clearly visible to everybody?
Yes, it is.
All right, great. Glad to hear you say that, Chris.
I can see it.
Yay, Chris.
So I'll start off with some background information on the overall tax base, which is all the taxable property real estate that we have in the town of Readfield. What we have over the past couple of years, what we've seen is an increase in the amount of construction and the value of our property as assessed by the state of Maine. And that's an important number for us to keep in mind. We need to be within a certain percentage of the state's valuation when we do our own local valuation in order to be eligible for certain grants and to get proper reimbursement for things like education and homestead exemption. And so for the second year, given the very fast escalation in growth and the inability to really do a proper revaluation because of the volatility of the housing market and the rapid increase, we've had to do a second year of a 10% across the board increase in the valuation of the tax base. And so what that means is that a house 2 years ago that was worth $200,000 in our eyes went up to 220, and then again to 242 with the 10% increase. That has had an almost equal reduction in the mill rate, and the tax base or the tax impact has been kept fairly flat. Something else that's really helped keep that tax rate flat is this 1% increase in new value that we did add this year. Typically, I'm very conservative and do 0.5%, but things are starting to really move, and we are already on the books for at least 1%, if not more, increase in the taxable the tax base as a result of new construction and renovations to homes. And next year, we're going to see, I mean, if we see 1.5 or 2%, I wouldn't be surprised. So we're on quite a roll right now, but that does have an impact, and one of the first and fundamental impacts on how we budget. Any questions on that before I move on to the next point? All right. All revenue lines were reviewed, as Andy had mentioned. We have been looking very carefully at the revenue coming in over the last year because we had projected significant impacts as a result of COVID. In some cases, those materialized, but in most cases, they did not. And in some cases, we were surprised by the opposite reaction that we would have expected from having a pandemic and a bit of a recession. We saw motor vehicle taxes that have been collected continue to increase at a record pace, really. So some things did what we thought they would, but most didn't. And so that's meant a lot of changes to the revenue projections for this current year. State revenue sharing, we have conservatively increased to $225,000, and I still think that's going to be less than what we'll actually get, but we want to be very careful with this one because the state revenue stream is really never guaranteed, and we don't want to put too much into it. Motor vehicle revenues are up, as I said, by a significant amount. That $57,000 represents about 11%. And one thing to note on that is that that's from the prior year's budget numbers. And we did drop those by a fair amount, probably 5 or 6% anyway. So we're actually, only increasing by a single-digit number, even though year over year, even though this shows an 11% increase when you look at the data. And then the new revenue for interlocal CEO is $36,135, and that's for the relationship that we've established with the town of Wayne to offer full-time benefits and full-time employment in order to retain, attract and retain a qualified code enforcement officer. And we're currently, again, still searching to fill that position. I'll roll through these a bit more quickly because they're more straightforward. Designated fund usage is down by $74,681. The use of undesignated funds is down by $52,117. Those are important to consider because last year we did use a lot of the reserve in order to help buffer and offset against those potential COVID impacts. So again, we are rolling back the use of those funds, making sure we have a healthy balance, and also just trying to use those funds still responsibly to balance the budget, but not get too deep. So that's a summary of those two items. Beach revenue is down an estimated $6,500, we'll say. The reason for that is that we did switch this year, which is a wonderful thing, to a free model where all residents of the town of Readfield can use the beach for free. And so we still will have some revenue coming in from out of town residents and folks that might be buying day passes for friends and family that are not local. So we have some revenue, but we will see an impact of that. We also anticipate bond proceeds of $395,000 this year, which is a pretty sizable chunk. And that borrowing actually puts this year's budget more in line with the budget from FY20. And I'll talk about that a little bit more later. Total transfer station revenues are up in net 10,233. And it's important to note here, and I can't thank Karen enough, the fees for the just transfer station fees for demolition and tipping and things like that are actually up 19,000. Some of that's the economy and the fact that there's a lot of people at home doing cleaning and renovations, but she's been very good and demonstrably improving our revenue collection over the past couple of years. So that's a positive trend that's allowed us to actually have a slight reduction in the overall cost of that facility, transfer station facility operation, even though we're putting more money aside for capital reserves, but more on that later. And then the last real highlight here is that First Park revenue is up by $10,000, and they are going to be revenue neutral for the first time in their existence, which has been probably close to 25 years, I think, at this point. So that's a very positive thing, and we have discussed a few different times the value or the challenges in maintaining our relationship with that organization. We don't probably need to get into those tonight, but it does appear as though we are better off staying with First Park now that they're breaking even and in future years projected to be making a small profit. So I will stop right there with any questions on anything I just went over.
Eric,
Yes, Dennis.
I just want to say congratulations to Jim Dinkle because he is doing the Lord's
Rock
work
star.
up there.
Yeah.
Are there any other questions for Eric at this point?
It's Ralph.
Yeah.
The use of undesignated funds down by 52 and change.
Mhm.
I'm just wondering what the projected balance at the end of the upcoming fiscal year will be, and if the budget committee and you are comfortable with that margin.
Yeah, so I'll get to that in an overview fashion a little bit later, but the short answer is I'm comfortable with where we're landing. The way it looks on paper right now, and I think I know it's because of my conservative budgeting, is that we're at about 95% of the 2/12 or the 2/12 what do you call it, policy we have for reserve balance. And actually, I think the fact that the school budget might be going up by a little bit more than we originally anticipated, that can actually drive that down a little bit too, because it's our overall expenditure, not just the town side of things. So right now we're about 95% of that. And I can talk about that a little bit more when we get to the debt service discussion, or not debt service, but the fund balance discussion.
Thank you.
But I'm comfortable with it, and yeah, I'll talk about it a little bit more later too.
Thank you, Eric. Go ahead.
All right, let's go back to this and from current slide. All right, so this is just a graphical, not a graphical, a tabular representation of the items I just discussed. You can see that we have very few areas where we have revenues that are declining. Most areas revenues are increasing, and the net impact here is about 6.6%. So part of the reason that we have the decline in administration is because we have a lower mill rate. The value of our homestead exemption is affected to some extent, but also we are by and large going to be seeing a small reduction in the amount of tax that is assessed for the municipal portion of this of this tax cycle. So we have a little bit less revenue coming in from property taxes. So $42,000 large dollar value, less than 1% in percentage when we get to that. And then you see revenue for Parks and Rec is down $6,000, almost identical to what we lost from user fees leaving as a result of that transition to a free beach. And then again, 24% looks pretty terrible on that percent change side, but really isn't that bad. And then capital improvements, as always, we see fluctuations here, variability. 2 years ago, we had a borrowing or a capital improvement expenditure amount that was similar or actually more than this. But because last year was a quiet year when it comes to capital, we see a large increase both in dollars and percentage points when we're looking at that. But that's the summary. It's all there. And any questions before I go to the next slide? Great. Here's the graphical representations. I won't spend too much time on this, just to point out the highlights. Again, capital improvements, we see a big percent change. Most everything else is fairly static. Dollar change, similar. And actually, if these things were scaled appropriately, they should be very similar in how they show up. But we do have, again, large dollar change in capital. That reduction that I mentioned in administration, you can see right there, and fairly modest changes in most other departments. Revenue by administration, I always break this one out because most of our revenue actually does come from the administration line, property taxes being a very large part of that, but this gives some more granularity. So you all and the residents can see in that most voluminous line, we can see at the division level. Up here I said by department, but that's actually not right. These are classified by division. We have the administration department, and these are all the individual divisions that are within that. And so we've talked about all of these things already, but this just gives you an idea of where things are going and just a different way to look at it with a bit more focus. And so here's the fund balance number that we were talking about. We're actually about where we were with estimate for 2017, and that's for the designated or the undesignated fund balance in blue. I have these identified as CF for carry forward, and I'm trying to move this tab so you can see it better. That's there's no good place for this thing, is there? And then the reserve balances, the carry forward is in red, undesignated fund, UF is in blue. And so to make a point here, what we have is reliable numbers through 2019. And we had seen over the past those years leading up to this, an increase in our fund balance. And we have been advised by our auditors to draw that balance down. They didn't like what they saw. They said it was increasing too much. And we've been working to do that. But the further out we go here, the less reliable these numbers are. Right now, we're still awaiting our final audit information from Barry Talbot Royer, who's our audit firm. And I have plugged in estimates of what I think these values will be based on projected expenditures, based on our own general ledger numbers. But truly, I often want to rely on the auditors and those audited financials because very often we have to make adjustments. So this year is our current audit year. This is the fiscal year we're in. We still have 3 months to go and a lot of uncertainty about what the final balances are going to be. And then FY22, what I'm showing is the projected end of the next fiscal year. So this pattern always reveals itself where I try to be a little bit more conservative the further out we go, because I don't want to find ourselves in a position where we're significantly under those thresholds. So we have a bit of a lead, and that's important to consider, again, because we rely pretty heavily on those balances to fund projects and to minimize impacts to the tax base and the tax rate. So that's my kind of spiel on that, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Eric,
Any questions?
this
Go
is
ahead.
Catherine. I have a question going back, but I don't think you need to go back on the slides.
Okay.
Is the reason we only are showing 37,000 in our capital expenditures in the last fiscal year because we put all of the 2 building bond amounts in the year prior to that?
That's correct, yes. And that has to do with our accounting and the fact that, as Ralph would remind us, we don't encumber things from one year to the next.
Oh,
So,
stop it.
so that was our
I'm not gonna
actual.
say that ever again.
So that was our actual budgeted expenditure, not what we actually spent. So
Okay, because
that's-
I know that one of the things that I've always been very concerned with, and the reason we developed our initial capital investment plan was so that we could plan things at a more or less steady rate, and that we would let the taxpayers know they could count on that. And so
Yes.
to see a fluctuation where we're showing a 1,200% increase is not what I want the taxpayers to think we're doing. Hardly having any investment in one year and then a whole lot in the next. So I just think it's important to note that we are actually spending on a rather even basis year to year.
That's a really good point. And those actual expenditures are much more even than what shows on the budget numbers. So yeah, thank you for pointing that out.
Thanks.
Yeah. All right. I'll go back to the slideshow. For some reason that went, there we go. All right. So fund highlights. And this is where I'll summarize some of the statements I just made. That 2/12 number that we talked about earlier, Ralph, this is what I'm referencing. And the fact of the matter is that 95% is, I think, very conservative, and we will likely come out well ahead of that, maybe even 110% of our 2/12 minimum. But I'm not a risk taker when it comes to that. The fund balance for both designated and undesignated funds do contribute to the stability in the mill rate and offset capital expenditures. And that goes right to Catherine's point about the fact that some years we're borrowing, some years we're spending. And in the end, we try to maintain a pretty level total investment in infrastructure, whether it's in borrowing or in outlays from reserves or the amount of money that's pulled out of taxes. And we move those 3 parts around pretty commonly to find that balance. Again, those numbers that I talked about with the blue and red, they're conservative, and that's why I'm comfortable with where we are. And again, we've already been through this piece too, the reductions that we've seen. And I think that is a responsible thing for us to be doing right now because we had a high year last year, and we're looking forward, and even though we're being conservative, we don't want to draw down to say a projected 80 or 85% because that would be a hard hill to climb if in fact some of those projections became more realistic. And then a sizable net decrease in overall use of funds, but again, it's going to result in a projected decrease, even though I think in reality it probably won't be a decrease. We want to have it on paper, be a little bit conservative so that we don't come up short. Expense highlights. So before I move on to that, anything on revenues or fund balances? One last chance.
I have a question on revenues.
Sure.
I was reading today some very, very initial MMA guidance, if you will, on the American Rescue Plan and dollars that may flow to municipalities in Maine. And so there is some money that will be coming into the state from the American Rescue Plan that by law goes to municipalities. I think there are 5 cities that have a certain share of that through a designation process, and I'm not sure what that is. Again, this is only guidance at this point. And then there's multi-millions, and I don't have those numbers in front of me, that will be divided across municipalities based on population. So we may be seeing some dollars coming from that. So I'm not giving any budgetary guidance on this at this point, but I do think as that develops and we get information, we should be developing a policy plan on how that money ought to be designated and used, obviously. So it's just a thought that there is probably some federal revenue that will end up being and I have no idea how, once you start talking about towns maybe being 1 million of the population outside those 5 cities, how that's all going to break down. Maybe we'll get a check for $2. I don't know. But we'll have to see, and I just want to make sure we have that in mind. And the budget has it in mind too. Yes.
So I don't know if Eric sent it out to all of us, but MMA has already published a listing by town. And Readfield is going to be receiving $260,000. It's going to be payable over 2 different fiscal years, a half in each year. It does have designated uses. It has to be for new spending. It can't be to reduce the tax burden. It's suggested that it be for things that were sort of at least COVID related. So one of the suggested uses is broadband. There's also another huge pot of money that's coming into the state. I think it's 130 million that they know of already that is going to go to broadband that'll be released out through what is the name of that? Connect Me, Eric?
That's right, Catherine, yes.
Right. And so that'll, a lot of that money will probably end up being earmarked for broadband, which Readfield will probably need some of. So, but it is pretty exciting, but we do have an amount that we can look at. And you're right, we will have to be very careful about how we spend that because it does come with restrictions.
Thank you.
Yeah, Catherine was discussing and reviewing that at the broadband committee meeting last night, so it's right on the top of her mind. So,
yeah, I didn't happen to see any breakdown with the material that I received, so I'll look further for that. Thank you.
Yeah, there's a list there. It's by every town, and it was based on population. So tiny towns get tinier amounts, and bigger towns get bigger.
Despite the size of their grand lists, huh?
Bruce, I think there were tabs at the bottom of that document that you were looking at, the one you're referring to.
Okay, I'll look closer. I just saw it very briefly and read it quickly.
yeah, well, I appreciate the thought and the point about having a plan in place for how to proceed with utilizing those funds. So that's really key. All right, so I'll jump back into the slideshow one more time here. I'm trying to go back and forth so that we can have face-to-face discussions wherever possible, which is what we want in most cases. So expense highlights. We have insurance, labor, and technology costs that are up, and they're up fairly significantly, almost $50,000 for those items. I think health insurance alone was 20 to 30,000. So we've seen some costs there. Part of that insurance increase is for the fact that we are offering now benefits again for the CEO, and that $40,500 number, or $40,050 that I reference here, that actually that the word benefits should not be there in its entirety. This shows primarily the wages and some of the benefits, but for example, the health insurance is actually under the administration department line, and that's part of that $50,000 that we're talking about here. So again, all part of the administration department, but I want to make sure that it's clear enough that we have increased the hours that the town of Readfield is paying for code enforcement and increased the benefits with an offset of approximately $36,000 coming from the town of Wayne to cover their share of the benefits and their share of the wages. Comprehensive plan, cost of $10,000 to phase fund phase 2 of our effort. And I got to say, last night we had a fantastic meeting with the Comprehensive Plan Committee. It was the first real meeting in which they got down to real business and just phenomenal response from the committee members and KV Cog. I think we've got a great team and they're committed to making sure we have lots of public input and outreach. So I'll just put a plug in there to have people keep an eye out for that. And then legal fees. This is the first year in several that we've been able to actually reliably fund a decrease in the legal services line following the establishment of that as a carry forward. So this year, we're probably going to turn back $10,000 or $15,000 into the reserve for legal expenses, which means we're able to reduce next year's budget impact as a result of having basically a good year where we had fewer legal expenses than we've had in the past. Any questions on administration expenses? All right, I'll move on to maintenance. This department is down a net of just over 4,000. We've achieved some of our maintenance goals, particularly with Guile Hall and a few other areas, so we're able to drop just a little bit on what we expend for maintenance. Any questions on maintenance? That was the single line we had for that. All right, and I'll point out again, these are just highlights, so there's a lot more if folks want to get into the budget detail. That's available on the town website. Also, I'm available for questions anytime. Call, I'm happy to discuss anything, any particular issue people have. And so this presentation really is just the top of the waves, and we're myself, and I know the budget committee and select board members are eager to help answer any questions that come up. So I'll move on to community services and say that we have a $2,500 decrease in streetlights, and that's as a result directly of the LED fixtures. This again is a bit conservative. I didn't want to take, eat the whole. There's probably a phrase out there, but didn't want to take all of that savings at one time because I'm not 100% sure of exactly what it's going to be, because we started off kind of midstream with some of these revenue savings or not revenue savings, but reduced expenditures for LED fixtures. So we'll probably see another reduction next year. So that's good news. We've also included $5,000 for broadband internet consulting relating to some of the comments that were made earlier. As everybody should be aware by now, the town is pursuing investigation of broadband to the home through a municipal fiber network approach. We're looking at some other options as well, but that's the direction that we're headed. In order to do that, we need to have some professional consulting services to help us move along and make sure that we have identified proper grant sources and things like that. And we also have money elsewhere in the budget for publications related to this line so that we can send out mailings, which have become more important, I think, during COVID, and also are a great way to reach pretty much everybody in town. There are very few other means to really get reliable, deep saturation of information to people other than perhaps putting something on the warrant, which can be a little bit late depending on what you're trying to accomplish. Any questions on community services? Okay, recreation parks and activities. We do have a small increase here for the beach. This reflects that overall effort to improve the facilities that we have, particularly recreational facilities. Protection. The fire department budget is up, but just slightly, and this is to account for stipends that had been on the books but hadn't been paid out previously, either because the position for which the stipend was allocated was not filled, or just because people weren't we weren't made aware that they were actually supposed to have these. So what this does is not really add liability, it just accounts for the liability that we really always had if we were to properly account for all the various deputy chief and all the positions in the fire department that get stipends. So I wanted to make that point. And then the ambulance budget is up. It's up pretty much every year because those costs escalate more quickly than other areas. So we have a $6,000 increase per the town of Winthrop, and they are our service provider and probably will be for a while. Any questions on protection? Cemeteries, very small increase here, $200. They've been very good about using fund balances to achieve special projects and also make sure they have minimal impacts. Roads and drainage, we have a small increase in maintenance costs, and that's for things like crack sealing, striping, routine gravel road work, not total road rebuilding, but basic road work, cold patch. So those are the things that fall under the maintenance line that has that lines that have that $3,700 net increase. The big change is, as I see it, is winter roads. The contract is up. We have a pre-bid next Thursday, and we expect to have a few contractors attend that. We're not expecting a huge increase in the cost of that. We do have one of the higher rates already in the region per mile for road maintenance in the wintertime. So we have a small increase to the base budget there, but the big increase that has been included is in the salt line. And the reason for that is that there's obviously periodic increases in the cost of salt, but we have increased the ratio of salt that we have in our mix. So the salt sand ratio is going from 15 to 1, 15 parts sand to 1 part salt, down to 10 to 1. And that will mean two things. We'll be putting less material on the road, which is good. And it'll also be more effective in melting at mid to low temperatures. So the higher salt content means that we have less material on the road in general, and less cleanup and less damage, I guess, to people's lawns. And then capital improvements, I'll start with these and then I'll stop and ask if there's any questions on the slide. Continuing on with some of these building projects, the fire station sprinkler system is budgeted at $200,000, and the library egress and associated work is at $50,000. So I'll stop there and ask if there's any questions on the slide. Okay.
Well,
And additional
real
question.
quick,
Go ahead, please.
the capital improvements, that 250,000 in aggregate is bond money, correct?
Yes, that's the intent, is that will be bond money.
Okay.
That's the way the warrant's being drafted at this point, unless there's a drastic change in direction.
Thank you, Eric.
All right, thanks, Bruce. Okay, so continuing on with capital, we have $422,000 for paving and infrastructure. And this is one of those areas that we highlighted earlier with the statement that we wanted to borrow responsibly. And what we've done is added a small amount of paving to our debt service. And we expect, I think it was $145,000 is what we had added, in addition to those two other items that we just talked about on the previous slide, the fire station and the library. And so we have paving that some of it's happening out of capital reserve, some of it's happening out of borrowing. And we have, in the current fiscal year and FY22, both Sturdivant Hill and Plains Road are going to be paved. And we actually had some fantastic bid results come in. So we will be able to have some flexibility in the coming years as to how we approach this. With our 12-year plan, we were a little bit worried that we might not have enough money in reserve and might need to rely on some heavy borrowing, or at least modest borrowing, 2 or 3 years down the road to deal with a big plug of roads. But what we're doing this year is, again, we have some savings because of the way the bids came in. We're looking at, I mean, it's going to be close to $80,000 or $100,000 less than what we had budgeted, which is great. And also we have this borrowing for the paving that was going to be done in FY23. So long story short, we're going to be accomplishing a couple years worth of paving in the current fiscal year budget and setting ourselves up to have a healthy reserve so that in the future we can realize another one of our goals, which is to keep things fairly flat by having some money in the bank to deal with probably a $400,000 or $500,000 paving expense, 2 or 3 years out. So then 85,000 for Parks and Rec, 20,000 of that is for beach infrastructure design and planning, 55 for ball field improvements, and 10 for open space. And I just want to highlight those three things individually a little bit so folks know what's actually being planned. The beach infrastructure is the master plan for the beach, much like we had one designed for the ball fields originally. We're looking to do the same thing with the beach and say, well, we'd like to have a 20 by 30 covered area for outdoor education and things like that. We'd like to have better changing rooms. We'd like to have potentially running water down there, which would be a benefit. So talking about some of those uses, talking about the idea of maybe having a new playground, and where do all those things go? So this money is allocated to pay a consultant to help with the public outreach and design of that facility, which is the first step in investing further in that infrastructure. So we can have a reliable idea of what we want, where we want it to go, and potentially even what it's going to cost. Oftentimes consultants can provide rough cost estimates based on similar projects in other areas. I did touch on the ball fields. This 55,000 is for, I guess, what I would call phase 2 of the ball field development. We did build the baseball field several years ago, thanks to some very generous donations and a lot of volunteer labor and equipment. The rec board would like to do something similar again and actually build the softball field that was also on that original plan. We still have a long ways to go with that, and this one, I'm not sure exactly how it's going to unfold or if it's all going to be this fiscal year or next, but it is important to point out that most of that $55,000 in expenses is planned to be offset by donations. So the net tax impact on this, I think, was maybe $5,000 or $10,000. So pretty modest considering the value that we would be realizing. And then the last item is open space. And this is the first year that we've actually put aside money for open space reserve. And it's a fairly broad category, but the idea here is that we are seeing rapidly increasing development in single-family homes. It probably won't be long before we start seeing large subdivisions coming into the town, 10, 20 units. And as our community changes, we want to be prepared to preserve some of those things that make our community most identifiable, the iconic farmlands, some of the natural areas. The way to do that is to have money on hand to perhaps incentivize a seller to buy easements or to work with a nonprofit like the Maine Farmland Trust to help put together a package of maybe buying development rights or something like that. Gives us some flexibility to preserve open space in the town, which has been an identified goal since the 2009 comprehensive plan. So enough on that. We have $45,000 for Church Road sidewalk design and planning. Again, this is another great project. Federal funding coming through the state of Maine, DOT, 80% match for that. So we are only on the hook for $9,000. And we actually had put away $45,000 for this a year, probably 2 years ago. So we already have designated funds available to move this project forward. And again, this is the phase 1 design and planning, and then we'll move forward with the rest of the project later. Again, at that same 80% funding match. And then ongoing lease payments at the transfer station for our compactor and backhoe leases, and a small reserve savings. So what doesn't go to lease payments will be going towards that capital reserve. So any questions on this page?
Yeah, Eric,
Yes.
me again. I wanted to express my continuing reservation about the enhanced borrowing package beyond the original $250,000 that we had spoken about to basically front load the road improvement schedule. My concern primarily is that at the back end of that, we're going to have more miles to repair as that mileage equation comes due. And that's a number that I don't think any of us are equipped to quantify down the road. I'm just wondering what you could tell me about, or tell us rather, about the impact of that extra money would be on the mill rate. I mean, if it's marginal and borrowing costs are low, then perhaps it makes sense. I'm just worried about the long-term impact in terms of what happens when we have to fix more miles of road down the road that's not necessarily in our schedule at this present point in time.
Yeah, so I mean, there's no question there is a mill impact, and I'm trying to escape here so I can look at my other screens that I have here and give a rough idea. That's not the file I want. Just a second here. While I'm looking, to answer your question about longer term impacts, we have a paving schedule right now that has a more or less fixed 12-year lifespan, and that's one of the last pieces that we'll be working on with that schedule. We've gradually built in all of the information on estimated costs, on right-of-way widths, on when the pavement was last put in place, the thickness, things like that. The last thing we need to do is actually put in non-uniform numbers for the lifespan of that pavement based on our experience. And so when we do that, we'll have a much better idea about what pavement might be coming due at any given time, given the life expectancy, right? So right now we're looking at a big plug in, like I said, 2 or 3 years. And that's probably realistic because we're close enough that we can see that coming, but without having better long-term estimates of what the pavement condition will be and how long it will last, it's going to be really hard for us to say in 6 or 8 or 10 years exactly what's going to be coming due. So, I think you're absolutely right. We can't really answer that question other than to say that we probably will have the same tools we have currently, being use of reserves, borrowing, and a little bit of the tax base to mitigate those things in a horizon that's approachable, much like we do with our capital plan. We probably shouldn't be looking at pavement more than 3 to 5 years out, I'd say. Does that partially answer what you're asking?
Yeah, and I've got a sneaking suspicion that the mill rate impact is marginal. It just, I think it's the long-term picture that is more of an issue for me, and I'm not sure it resonates in other quarters, but those costs never go down.
Yeah, no, they don't. And well, I can't say they never do. We had a pretty good run the last year with COVID driving.
You're not going to this next year because oil prices, the base chemical is going through the roof.
They already started to climb. Yeah, we got our RFP in just in time, and we were able to secure some of these spring prices that people have made purchases on the liquid asphalt through the summer. So yeah, no, that's a good point, Ralph. And so I did get that sheet open, and the mill rate impact of $100,000 is 0.34 mils with the current calculus. So that means that we'd be just about a half of a mil for $150,000.
Thank you.
And so that impact depends on the value of your home, right? So all right. Any other questions on that slide? And I'll get back to it.
This is Sean from the Rec Board. I don't have a question. I just want to thank the Budget Committee for putting in, the stuff about the beach and the ball field improvements. We're working really hard at Rec to do what we can to help with that and offset those costs in the future. And I don't know if you know this, but we put together a youth derby in 3 weeks this last month and raised over $1,000, and all of that is going towards the field development. So we were pretty excited about that. But I just wanted to say thanks again for highlighting these items on the budget.
Great. Well, it's great to hear that. It's a shared community goal, and I know the Select Board and Budget Committee have all been right behind it all the way. So let's go back to that slideshow. Okay. So moving on with the highlights for expense. Solid waste, we have a $7,150 increase in transfer station expenses. A lot of that is a result of increased costs for transportation and tipping, as well as some of the same ratios for increase in insurance and wage and benefit costs that we saw in administration are reflected here. The reason that we put all of those areas individually in solid waste is, as many of you may know, we share the transfer station with 2 other municipalities, and so we capture all of the expenses that we have for that department in that one department, and we don't consolidate it as we've done with some other areas and some other departments. So we do have a small increase there, but again, it is offset by revenues, and overall what we have is a reduction, albeit a small one, in what is being paid out by those 3 towns in aggregate for this service. So that's really good to see, and year over year we've been able to do that in large part due to the staff and their commitment and the creative ways in which we're addressing some of our waste streams, like paint and fluorescent light bulbs, which we talked about not long ago. So things are moving well in that direction, and even though there is an increase, it's offset, and I'm quite happy with the direction that department's headed. County tax, we have an estimated 3% increase. This is just an estimate. We don't know yet what the county is going to charge us. It's $9,000 and change for the actual impact, estimated again, and we'll know before town meeting what the actual number is, but I expect that it will be less than this 3%. So I think we'll be pretty safe
Eric?
with that. Yes.
I do have a question on the county tax. When we actually calculate the municipal budget from year to year and compare it, are we backing out the county tax just like we back out schools?
Yes. So when I talk about municipal expenditures, I don't include things from, with the exception of First Park, from third-party entities that bill us, right? So the county gets backed out and the school gets backed out.
Which are they're like other taxing authorities is my point.
Exactly. Yep. That's a good point. All right. So debt service, we are paying off this year a 2013 road bond. So that cleared up, I think it was $130,000 off the books. And we have, again, projected to add some borrowing, and we have ongoing expenditures for existing bonds. And the net there is a reduction of $71,000 in debt service. And we can look at that more a little bit later. And then unclassified, I did and still do have $25,000 in there for unknowns. And we're still sorting out some of those. Teresa and I have been working diligently the last couple of days on the benefits and things like, where all those merit increases are going to go, and some other factors. So that's still in there. I'm hoping that by the time we get to a final proposed budget for the select board, boy, about 10 days from now, that we will have those numbers sorted out. If not, you may see a similar number to this in the budget. I'm not terribly concerned about that if that is the case. Obviously, we want to budget as much as we can in the appropriate categories, but some of these things are just taking longer than we expected and even longer than what we may have time for. So I will just say, there's a little bit of an asterisk on this one with unclassified that we added money to address some of those things. We're working on it, and we'll see how far we get at properly classifying those. Any questions on this slide? All right.
Just a comment. I think we'll
Yep.
probably get pretty far with properly classifying that.
I do too.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yep. This is the summary showing all the different departments all at the expense level. And you can see most of them are going up. There are a few that are going down. Maintenance is one, and then the debt service. As is usually the case, I'll point it out one more time, when we have reductions in debt service, we almost always see increases in other areas, and capital expenditures is one of those. This reduction in debt service does, however, not show at this level the fact that we do have some new debt coming on board, small amount, but impactful, and more impactful next year when we have both principal and interest payments coming due. This year we just have the interest payment that would be due for FY22. So similar results to the revenue side, almost identical. I think there's probably a couple thousand in here I need to sort out that I haven't been able to quite balance from my my spreadsheet. But in any event, we have just under 7 million in expenditures, 6.7% increase overall. And so dollar change by department, basically the bar graphs that are representing this table, same as with revenue side. And I don't think I'll need to say much more on this. That I think we've gone through it already. So I'll just move on to the next and ask if there's any questions on any of this as we go through it. Okay. Current and proposed debt service. This is an important graphic. As I said, we do have just the interest payment on the new borrowing that we're proposing. This star represents FY22. It's identified there at the bottom as well, but helps you find it visually. The road bond being paid off is the green here, and that is, right about 100. I guess it's less than 130, maybe 110,000 that's being paid off. But that going away gave us some capacity. We still do have the 3 ongoing bonds, the 2016 fire truck, the 2018 Marinacook Dam, and the 2020 municipal building bond. So we will be adding to that. And what I haven't shown here, and that we're not sure about really, is what's going to happen with other borrowing in the future. In the past, I have tried to show some of those things, but there's no really clear way to do it. One of my goals for next budget season and cycle is to try to integrate the designated and undesignated fund balance spreadsheets that we have with our 5-year capital plan, with our debt service schedule. I don't know what that's going to look like, but I think that we can do a bit of a better job of bringing those things together to show how they all relate, and really trying to populate with some idea of what might be out here in the next 5 to 10 years, and also how we might be paying for it. So these things are all being shown independently and individually right now, but I think we can do better in the future. But this is our debt horizon as it stands, as we have projected based on the current fiscal year. And I'll stop and ask if there are any questions about any of this right now. Okay, great. Municipal budget highlights. We're almost to the end of the show here. And this is to Bruce's question. What's the impact? And we have expenses that are increasing overall by about $427,000. That does match pretty closely the FY20 levels that we had for expenditures. So it's not certainly not out of the realm of reason, even though it's a large dollar value. And these expenditures are also offset by revenue. And the next bullet summarizes that as well, saying that year over year, when we increase revenues or increase expenditures, revenues were also increased. But we were able to do that in a way this year that will result in a net reduction in the tax impact for the municipal side of things. And I'll just say that plainly, that we haven't budgeted right now for any increase in the RSU. When that does happen, we will see a change to the mill rate without question. And then our portion of that mill rate is down slightly as well as a result of the dollar value reduction that we are able to realize, which is pretty modest. School and county budget highlights. The information for the school budget is excellent. The school does a fantastic job of putting their information out. And I want to thank Rebecca and our other school board members for their part in helping to keep that school budget balanced in the sense that they're trying to prioritize the best education for the students that they possibly can, and also looking at the impact on the taxpayers. So Rebecca's on our budget committee and the school board, so she's doing double duty, and it's great to have that representation. The school budget is likely to increase. I had initially estimated 3 to 4%. It looks like it might be a little bit more than that, but regardless, in the grand scheme of things, it usually is right around 75 to 76% of property taxes. And then the county budget is fairly static at around 5%. So I'll stop and ask if there are any questions or if any comments on school and county budget.
I would just say from my attendance at the school board meeting, and by the way, I want to share some appreciation for other board members joining with us. We, again, were the most well-represented town to participate in the joint select board school board meeting. But anyhow, I came away with very distinct impression that they were within that 3 and 4% range and not higher. Do you have different information?
Yeah, Rebecca gave me a bit of a heads up that after their meeting yesterday, they're looking at their total budget, I think, is going to be up in that range, but the tax impact for the town of Readfield, because of our changes in valuation and funding formula and all that stuff, is probably going to be closer to 5%.
Okay. Thank you.
But that was like 2 minutes before this budget meeting started, so you're not missing anything really.
Great. So are you all set, Eric? I'll go with the important dates to remember.
Yeah, sure.
And so before we wrap up here, I want to make very sure, and we only have one citizen actually with us, but if anyone wants to ask a question, to make a generalized comment on the budget, the space to do that is hereby open. Okay, we had a moment of silence. Great. I guess I would close talking about these dates really quickly, but also that as all this information is available on the website, and all the people you see here are very able to answer questions as you get into anything that you need information on. to make your decision when you vote. And Eric also generously said that, you know, he's certainly available and at the town hall to provide information. So some important dates to remember are on April 1st will be the deadline for the FY21 homestead exemption applications. They're worth $394 a piece, and that in effect can lower your taxes, obviously. On April 9th, nomination papers and warrant is due to the town clerk. So that's kind of a informational point in time, so you know that we're in the process of preparing the warrant and preparing balloting information and so forth. So we have the appropriate amount of time to have ballots printed and absentee ballots to be handled. And I'm assuming we'll have a lot of absentee voting. The final budget meeting and hearing is on May 13th. That, unlike tonight, is where we have a warrant that has been endorsed by the select board, and you will have on it both the select board and the budget committee recommendations on the financial pieces. And that's where a citizen can address a particular warrant article. There's no changes to the warrant at that point, but they can say, I think this warrant article ought to be voted down, or this warrant article ought to be supported because. On May 7th, those absentee municipal ballots will become available, and our town meeting by secret ballot is on June 8th this year. So thank you very much for being here. Does anyone have any final comment on anything that I didn't cover, or just they thought of as that second thought they wish they had said?
Bruce, could I just say just a quick thank you to the Budget Committee. This has not been an easy year, and I think the document as it stands right now is representative of the town needs and fair to the taxpayers. So thank you all very much for your hard work.
Ralph, you stole my words. Thank you, everyone.
It's about time.
Thank you. So we're kind of in the fine-tuning phase to get this to on March 29th to the select board to endorse the budget and add their recommendations. I believe that's when we do that. And then I think the budget committee is doing theirs on April 1st. Is that correct?
That is.
What a date to do that. Thank you. I declare this meeting adjourned.